follows an extract from my book Fête Fatale, available from Amazon. Chapter 4, Part 1. In an impromptu gesture of kindness, not to mention an inclination to join in the fun, Jonty had brought a few friends along to the fête and had set up an ad hoc swing band next to the village hall, conveniently close to the refreshments area. He had always possessed the knack of getting on the good side of old ladies in possession of tea and cake. Jonty said that coming back to play for the fête was good for him and made him remember the good old days of playing in the middle of a field with clothes pegs fastening his music to the music stand. Today they may well have begun with some sheet music, but not much evidence of following the notes was apparent, judging by the prolonged passages of Chattanooga choo-choo, which became quite unrecognisable. The only form of any sort of organisation was that someone had to walk over and tell them to shut up in time for the Templeton singers to do their bit. They were in the middle of a seriously extemporised version of Fly Me to the Moon when the pale, drawn features of Dr. Wainwright walked past. Following behind the doctor came May, wearing a similar expression. With hardly a nod, Jonty quickly brought their number to a perfect cadence and walked over to May to find out what was going on. "He really is dead," she said. "I can't believe it. Betty was right. He really is dead. Goodness, May, what are you on about? Who's dead?" "John Barlow. We just thought he was ill and his diabetes was playing up a bit, that's all." "I guess his diabetes really was playing up. And now he's dead. I knew he was a bit stressed lately and wasn't feeling well, but I had no idea that it could have led to this. Poor Jean, she doesn't know anything about it yet." Jonty laid a hand on May's arm as the enormity of the situation hit her. May looked up and her attention snapped into focus as she saw Betty scurrying excitedly about the field, heralding the news abroad with gusto. "Oh no, Betty's telling everybody. I can't let Jean find out this way. I'll have to go and stop her." May practically ran across the field, making a beeline for the voluble old lady. Jonty ambled over to the ensemble to explain the situation, and a unanimous decision was made to retire to the Badger. Of course, their main aim was to be helpful in getting out of the way. Saying nothing to the landlord of recent events, they set about restoring the viscosity of their embouchure as only brass players knew how. Inside the village hall, a confused debate had arisen. As there was already a doctor present, nobody seemed to know what the correct procedure now was. Dr. Wainwright had easily certified John as dead. He was found sitting in a plastic garden chair set amongst the trade refuse bins and surrounded by discarded drinks bottles and spent ashtrays. His arms were hanging limply parallel to the chair legs, and his head had fallen backwards, leaving him gazing, eyes open and unseeing, into the now bright sunshine. The fact that Dr. Wainwright had walked up to John and felt for a pulse was perfunctory. He was obviously dead. He'd have to speak to Jean to find out if they'd made any prepaid arrangements, but there was only one funeral director in Mossleigh, so he knew who he'd be calling. He also said that he'd need to contact the local police. "That's a bit drastic, isn't it?" said Carlton. "It's not as if there's been an accident and nothing can be done for the poor chap now." "It's just a matter of form," said Wainwright. "An unexpected death, and with no apparent witness, will need a few conventional questions answered. I suppose that as his GP I'll be the one answering most of those questions, so that's all right." "I'll go and see if anybody has found Jean yet. When you've finished your calls, come into the kitchen and we'll prepare for the onslaught," said Carlton, as he walked into the adjoining kitchen. It was a large, high-ceilinged room which was bare except for an old gas cooker, a sink unit, a large table and a wall cupboard. It was currently occupied with several ladies of the WI walking busily to and fro across the parquet floor, feeding the refreshment hatch, which in turn fed the visiting throng. In the far corner of the kitchen he found Beth administering the tried and tested British remedy of sweet tea to Jean. Natalie had caught the look in Beth's eye as she and Jean were passing by the cake stall, and leaving the younger ladies in charge, wordlessly joined in escorting Jean back to the village hall. Gradually the situation had unfolded, and Natalie, like a magician, produced the ever-present hip flask and sloshed a healthy measure of single malt into the teacup which was being offered to Jean. The fact that Jean never took sugar in her tea and never drank whisky wasn't relevant in this instance, and although she grimaced a little at her first sip, the cup nevertheless soon emptied. Jean's glassy, uncomprehending stare gradually began to clear as the reality of the situation began to dawn upon her. "I know he's been a bit offside lately, but I didn't think he was really ill," she said. "I'd have been more patient if only I'd realised." At this point, the floodgates of her emotion burst in a tide of words and tears. "It's all my fault," said Jean. "I shouldn't have given him that jar of jam. I thought I was being kind, and I really didn't think it'd make that much difference." "Nonsense," said Natalie, ever to the point. "No diabetic I ever knew stuck to their diet like John did. The wonder was that John was so disciplined. A few days of jam on toast is a drop in the ocean. Don't even go there, Jean. Nobody expects to die, and I'm sorry that it's happened, but these things just can't be helped." Dr. Wainwright walked into the kitchen to find Carlton and the ladies. Carlton had kept apart from the trio, thinking that this moment was best left to the women. He looked up as the doctor joined him. "I've telephoned the police station," said Wainwright. "Sergeant Maddox is on his way. I've given him a brief outline of events, and it doesn't seem necessary for anybody else to come. We should be able to deal with the procedures between the two of us. I just need a few details from Jean, and then I'm going to wait in the office here until Maddox arrives. I just want to check that Jean is all right." Walking over to the corner of the kitchen, he pulled up a chair so as not to loom over the huddled figure and said, "I'm so sorry that this has happened, and I know that it's a huge shock, but I do need to sort a few formalities. Do you think you can help me?" Jean looked up at him and smiled, a crooked smile in acknowledgement. "Do you have any funeral plans organised? I don't need too many details, but is there a particular funeral director I can contact for you to sort things out?" "We both organised pre-planned funerals last year," Jean replied. "The advertising worked. You never really think you need to, do you? It's Bruff's from the village. Ring Fred Bruff, he'll know what to do." "That's great, Jean." Dr. Wainwright gave Jean a beaming smile which would usually have had his patients fainting and hoping for resuscitation. Then his expression became more serious as he said, "I'm afraid that's not quite all, Jean. The police are on their way and they will need to have a word with you. It's nothing to worry about, it's just a formality because it's an unexpected death. Not that any of us ever expect to die. I'll speak to Maddox first as John's GP, but he'll want to speak to you and maybe some others too. Before we begin to organise matters though, do you want to go and see John, or would you rather not?" Jean nodded her head and got up to follow him, but then stopped and didn't seem sure. He gently guided her from the kitchen and, looking over his shoulder, gave Carlton a beckoning glance. Understanding the inclination, Carlton got up from his seat and followed behind as they walked to the back of the hall. John was still as they had left him and was guarded from view by a couple of sentries that Dr. Wainwright had posted at the corner of the building. As Jean approached the burdened chair, her pace slowed and she stretched out her arm and placed it mechanically on John's shoulder. She then straightened her back, squared her shoulders and turned to walk back to the kitchen. Once Jean was again in the capable ministrations of the ladies, Dr. Wainwright and Carlton walked to the side of the village hall and into the office building which communicated with the main building. The doctor doubted that Jean would accept their attentions for much longer. She'd shaken off the mantle of grieving widow as soon as she had laid her hand on her dead husband's shoulder. "Thank you for coming with me just then, Carlton," he said. "You can never guess how someone will react. If she was going to faint, I didn't fancy catching her by myself. Mind you, it seems like she's steeled herself to the situation and has adopted the stiff upper lip mechanism. Everybody copes in different ways." I know that you say it's a coping mechanism, but it does seem mighty heartless. It looks like she just doesn't care. But what do I know about such things? I presume that you'll want to speak to Maddox in private. I'll go and find Kirsty. She's probably about here somewhere by now. I suppose the news will have got around. For the full book of Fête Fatale, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.